Good evening, everybody. We're excited to be back with you again. My name's Andrew Dalton. I'm the Executive Director of the Adams County Historical Society in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And I'm here with Tim Smith, our Historian and Collections Manager, a licensed battlefield guide, author of 10 books and I don't know how many articles. We're both very passionate about the topic that we're bringing to you tonight, and that is the early commercialization of the Gettysburg battlefield. We're, as local historians, we're very interested in all the various businesses and hotels and other entities that existed literally right on the battlefield, and may not be visible today. If you visit a lot of the battlefield and see an open field, you wouldn't necessarily think about what had been there. So we're excited about the program. We hope you'll join us next Thursday at 7. We're going to continue our weekly series. We do have a donate button on the post tonight. So if you enjoy the video, I hope you'll take a chance to take the opportunity to hit the donate button and support our efforts to preserve local history. The Historical Society is the county archives here in Gettysburg. We preserve over 1 million historic items from all eras of American history, from dinosaur footprints to Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower's personal items that belong to them. We hope you'll also consider joining the Adams County Historical Society on our website. There's a Join Us page, and we always really welcome donations and any kind of support, especially now during these uncertain times. So thank you for being with us tonight, and we are going to get right into the program, and I'll pass it over to Tim.
Well, tonight's topic is commercialization, and I think sometimes commercialization has sort of a negative connotation. But in reality, to be a successful tourist site, commercialization and memorialization go hand in hand. I think we've all been to historic sites that are preserved in a pristine condition, and there's no place to stay, and there's no place to eat. And so you have to have a tourist infrastructure if you expect people to come to your area and learn about your history. So you need hotels, and you need restaurants, and you need commercialization of the site. And I think the challenge is to find like a good balance of commercialization and memorialization. And early on, Gettysburg was a commercial area as well as a battlefield that people wanted to visit. This is George Arnold. He had a store in the square of Gettysburg at the time of the battle. And he, a few weeks after the battle, wrote a letter, actually in August of 1863, so about a month after the battle. He wrote a letter to one of his friends who was in the army, and he talked about the situation around the town. And he says, quote, "Our town has now become immortalized, and we wish to make the enterprise as attractive as possible by enclosing and beautifying those grounds moistened with the blood of our heroic brave. And I have no doubt that our town will be much benefited by it for years to come." So, and when you read his letter, his entirety of his letter, he is very much into the idea of memorialization of the area where the battle was fought. He's very patriotic, but also he senses the opportunity here to create something that will make money for the local population, a population that had been devastated by losses, financial losses because of the fighting that took place in their town. We also have some interesting insights into early tourism by Sarah Broadhead. It's really difficult for us to imagine the situation in the town after the battle was over. Not only did we have the townspeople returning to their homes and trying to return to some normalcy after the fighting was over, but there are some 20,000 wounded soldiers in and around the town itself. And there is a large amount of visitors that are coming into the town. Some of those visitors are bringing food and supplies for the wounded, and medical supplies to care for the wounded. And some of the people that are coming into town are there because their relative was wounded in the battle or their relative was killed in the battle, and they've learned of that, and they're coming to recover their loved one's body or to bring some help to someone who is wounded. And these people that are coming into town need a place to stay. But there's a third group of people that is flocking into the town immediately after the battle, and that's sightseers, people who are early tourists. Now, maybe they're just coming in out of a sense of, to see the great tragedy that is occurring. But Sarah Broadhead, who kept a diary in the days before and after the battle, had some interesting insight. And she says in one of her entries, "The town is as full as ever of strangers. And the old story of the inability of a village of 2,500 inhabitants overrun and eaten out by two large armies to accommodate from 10 to 12,000 visitors is repeated almost hourly." In another entry, she wrote in frustration that the town would not hold all who, for various motives, visit the battlefield. There's an interesting editorial in the Philadelphia newspaper on July 15th that tries to warn people to stay away from the battlefield because there's a lot of suffering, and they really don't, the town doesn't really need large amounts of visitors in the town. And it says specifically, it's called a word of well-meant advice. Let no one come to this place for the simple purpose of seeing. To come here merely to look at the wounded and dying exhibits a most vitiated taste. Besides, every such visitor is a consumer and adds to the misery of the wounded by subtracting from them the means that should be given exclusively to them. Let all who come with some stores for the sick and ready to work for them, but let all mere sightseers stay at home. They are mere cumberers of the ground. I don't know if cumberers is a word, but it was an interesting situation in the town after the battle. And I don't think a lot of people realize all the visitors that started to inundate Gettysburg immediately after the fighting was over. Now, it became apparent early on that Gettysburg was something that people were interested in and that they wanted to see it even before the war ended. And of course, the first big tourist day in our town was on November 19th, 1863, during Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It's estimated that as many as 15 to 30,000 people showed up in town at that time. Usually you hear 15, but that's kind of the low figure in the various estimates. There were a lot of people, and these people needed some place to stay. They needed food, and there were committees established of citizens. There's a couple great accounts where the citizens get together and try to organize so that they can accommodate all the visitors that are attending the ceremony. Most of the visitors are coming in by train. So they're here and they're probably going to spend the night and then leave on the train the next day. A lot of people came by carriages and then could leave, but a lot of the people needed someplace to stay. So they organized churches. There were, of course, all the hotels were full, and a lot of families took in extra people in their rooms or on their floor to accommodate this. And so I think on November 19th, 4 months after the battle, Gettysburg had its first taste of actual tourist visitation. Let's go to the next one. Now, it's interesting that our town seems to be well prepared to be the center of a tourist destination, even before we start to really get into the tourist phase. You probably know that the carriage industry was very big in the town prior to the Civil War. And there were, I guess the town was sort of a a point between places for travelers. We had a stagecoach that stopped at some of the hotels, but you might spend the night here on your way from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, or on your way from Baltimore and somewhere northward to Harrisburg. And there were it depends how you count, but there were 5 major hotels in the town. This is the Eagle Hotel, and this is from an 1858 drawing. It's from the 1858 wall map. That was on Chambersburg Street. We had, of course, the McClellan Hotel in the square of Gettysburg. We have the Globe Inn that was on York Street. The Washington House on Carlisle Street that's relatively new, across from the railroad station. And then we had the Wagon Hotel that was south of town. And these were pretty big places of accommodation for tourists. And there was an old Temperance House hotel, a place that had been used as a hotel that would be reopened as a hotel after the Civil War, but at the time of the battle, it was just sort of an apartment building. And each of these places had a livery stable. We have a 1890s view here, Andrew, of the livery stable that was associated with the Eagle Hotel on behind the alley there. And this livery stable would later be used by a number of townspeople to transport people around the battlefield. We had a railroad that came in to Gettysburg from the east, the Gettysburg, Hanover Junction Railroad that led to the Northern Central Railroad. So people could get here by train from Baltimore, Washington, or Harrisburg. And so tourists could come in, and this livery stable happened to be very close to the railroad. When the people got off the train, there were hack drivers. And these were basically local people who drove carriages out of one of the hotel livery stables or another livery stable that maybe there was a few that weren't associated with hotels. And on a busy day, they would wait at the train station. People would get off the train. And then if they wanted to tour the battlefield, they could hire one of these hack drivers, they were called, and they would take them around the battlefield. And here's a photograph from the 1880s. Let's go to the next one, Andrew, of an early carriage, and with some of the hack drivers all kind of sitting around eating some cherries, I think, in the photograph. They're at Devil's Den, and this is a Mumper view from about 1885, I believe. But these hack drivers could be hired, and you could hire them to take you to Little Round Top and around the battlefield. And of course, this is one of the ways that the licensed battlefield guides actually became, popular and generated. We had these early drivers. They're not historians, but early on, people were asking them questions about the battle. Now, some of the tour guides started because, according to tour guide legend, that families were coming to ask where their relative might be buried, and people became knowledgeable about where the different units had fought and where people from those various units might be buried around the field, and then they could take the people to those locations early on, before the bodies were all moved to the National Cemetery. And so these hack drivers, though, began to collect stories about the battle and would take people around and would tell them stories as they drove around. There's all kinds of interesting articles in the various newspapers across the country about tours of Gettysburg in the early days. And some people come here, have very good experiences with very knowledgeable people, and they have a really good time and they recommend it. And other people come and they think they're being taken advantage of by being put in a carriage with a kid that did nothing but hide in his basement during the battle. And now he's an authority, 20 years later, he's an authority on the battle and from his knowledge. There's a really good article, an anti-tour guide article in the Gettysburg, I should say the New York Times in 1888. And it's called Never Mind the Guide. And it's about how you shouldn't get a tour guide. And for a while, the War Department didn't exactly know what to do with these early hack drivers and tour guides. And there's early tour books that have a map with them that you can buy around town. And a couple of them have these nasty statements on the bottom of them. Stay away from the hack drivers which infest our train station and our town, and give out bad information on the battle. And I guess we should thank some of these early hack drivers that were giving out really bad information, because it led to people becoming interested in training people to become tour guides. And eventually, it led to the licensing of tour guides and the administering of a test for the tour guides that actually created the licensed battlefield guide as we know it. And today, to become a guide, you have to go through a rigorous procedure, and you can't just be out there on the battlefield telling all kinds of stories. But in the early days, when people visited here, they had no idea if they were going to get a good tour guide or a bad tour guide, unless, of course, they had set up one ahead of time that was recommended to them. Want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure. Before we get into the next topic, I just wanted to thank the 3 or 4 people who've donated so far. We really do appreciate it. Every dollar helps us keep and preserve over 1 million historic items. So we thank you for that, and hope you're enjoying this program series. One of the really early commercial attractions on the Gettysburg battlefield, and my favorite for personal reasons, is the development of a mineral spring located along Willoughby's Run. I grew up really near to that place, and some of you may know that I've written about it. But I wanted to go into some detail about this because really I think of all of the Gettysburg post-Civil War Gettysburg attractions, the Springs Hotel, the spring and the hotel subsequently that was built near the spring, were really the first major tourist attraction and kind of dominated the scene in the town. So where is this located? If you haven't ever visited the Emanuel Harmon Farm, it's the land located immediately west of Willoughby's Run. So in 1865, the owner of that property, Emanuel Harmon, marketed the water from his spring. The water supposedly had qualities that were curative and could heal rheumatism and diabetes and arthritis, and in some cases even ugliness is listed as one of the potential cures for the water. It looks like we might be having some technical problems. I hope not, but I'll look good on your end. Okay. So this is the article from the Springs discovery from November of 1865. It's November 21st, 1865, really soon after the Civil War. And I should mention too that the property owner, Harmon, he was a Washington, D.C. inventor and a businessman. And so it's pretty clear that he was probably well aware of the fact that the spring didn't have the curative powers that it was said to have. But this is the article that was first introducing the spring to the public, which appeared in our local newspapers in Gettysburg in November of 1865. And you can see it was analyzed by Professor Alfred Mayer, who was in the science department at Pennsylvania College, which is now Gettysburg College. So does it look like we're good, Tim, on the live?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, it must be just my own connection here. So this is an early photograph that was taken of the spring house that was constructed around the mineral spring. And around this time, the spring was given a name, and it's kind of a strange name, a Greek word, catalsign or catalysine. You can pronounce it many different ways. Dr. Charles Glatfelter of the Adams County Historical Society told me to say it catalysine, and he told me that he knew people who were around for this, and they knew, and so he knew how it was pronounced. So I've tried to adapt to that pronunciation. And what does it mean? And that's also up for debate. It's a Greek word. It's actually a kind of a merging of Greek words according to the sources that I've seen, and it really boils down to meaning downward flowing, which is kind of a nice way of describing how your digestion would be improved by the water. And more crassly, you could say that it basically means the water is a laxative. And originally the water from the spring, the legend of the water from the spring, which probably has no basis at all in fact, is that the Confederate Army, after fighting across this land on the first day of the battle, was camped nearby and drank the water and was immediately consumed with, the soldiers were consumed with violent diarrhea. And so they thought the spring had been poisoned by the Union Army, but in fact, it was just the curative, laxative powers of the water with minerals like lithium and magnesium and other things that you might find in mineral waters. But this is also kind of part of a national craze at the time. So Gettysburg really is trying to assert itself as not just a battlefield that you can visit and tour, but also a resort, perhaps something a bit more positive to bring to Gettysburg. And this is built right on the first day's battlefield along Willoughby's Run. And in fact, because of this venture, the land west of Willoughby's Run was kept in private hands, eventually becoming the Gettysburg Country Club golf course until 2011 when the park acquired it. So this is a photograph that shows the spring house to the left, and you can see a guy standing on the roof, and then there's some other outbuildings nearby as well. Another article that I really enjoy is this one. It's actually from the New York Times. So Emanuel Harmon leased the spring to a New York company that was bottling the water. This is around 1867 into 1868. And in 1869, during the spring, there was a conflict over the possession of the bottling works. And the New York company and the Gettysburg company that were working together, Harmon's people versus the New York people, almost got into an armed conflict. And this is a New York Times article called "The Battle at Gettysburg." Latest news from the front proclaims a lull in the hostilities. The other day, there were war rumors from the historic battlefield, and it goes on and on. Armed force was on duty to guard the spring during the night. History was about to repeat itself. So it's a really neat article. The following day or a couple days later, actually a New York agent arrived and tricked the Gettysburg employees into letting him into the spring and then turned the key and locked them out. And so there's all this drama happening over the spring, which is really interesting, enough so that it makes the columns of the New York Times. But meanwhile, as the water is growing in popularity, there's a hotel constructed just a little bit west of the spring. And the hotel actually stood for about 48 years. It was completed in 1869 and then burned down in 1917. And getting folks out to this hotel was another kind of commercial entity that rose up at this time. And this is the route of the trolley line. So it was a horse-drawn trolley. And the trolley line took guests from the train station in Gettysburg, what is now called the Lincoln train station, down Chambersburg Street, across the Lutheran Seminary campus, and then down to what is now Reynolds Avenue, Meredith Avenue, and it ends at its terminus at the Springs Hotel. And if you know Springs Avenue in Gettysburg, that is why it's called Springs Avenue. It was developed as the trolley line to take guests out to the hotel. And here's an illustration that was included in Batchelder's book, John Batchelder, an early battlefield guide and historian. I believe the book was published in 1871. Tim might be able to correct me. But the illustration here was in the front cover, and it is a illustration done by Batchelder or one of his associates looking west across Willoughby's Run, across the bridge toward the new hotel. It's a fascinating little illustration. And there's actually abutments of that bridge still down there along Willoughby's Run, which you can go see if you visit the site. I'm sure some of you may have already done that. And I'm looking to see if there's any questions. Not any yet. As somebody's mentioning that they have some bottles from the spring. I actually have one right here. I have a few, and this is one. It's from the late 1860s. It says Gettysburg Catalysine water around in a semicircle. These bottles, you can sometimes still find them on eBay. We have a few in the collection of the Adams County Historical Society, but they're a really neat physical remnant of this whole enterprise out here. So here's the hotel. It was completed, like I said, in the summer of 1869. And it immediately became a gathering place for veterans reunions, for civic groups in the town, and for tourists. A lot of battlefield tours started and ended at the Springs Hotel because of the railroad bridge, and there was also a road that led out to the Chambersburg Pike. It was accessible to the battlefield, accessible to the town, and it really had a wonderful view of the battlefield from the cupola. The hotel could accommodate about 250 guests. And if you think about it, 1869, we're only a few years really after the battle. And this has this part of the battlefield's already been developed with a massive hotel that's tied to a resort that's nationally famous in its time. And if you zoom in the photo, which I did when I first scanned this image from the Historical Society, you can see one of the workers, this is all the construction workers posing outside. You can see he's holding up a bottle from the spring and drinking it, which I really like. So here's another illustration that we used as the cover slide for this program on Facebook. And it is an image of George Meade sampling the water when he arrived in 1869 for the hotel's dedication. Really, the reason he was here was for the completion of the Soldiers' National Monument in the National Cemetery here in Gettysburg. There were a number of generals here for that occasion, Lucius Fairchild, Solomon Meredith, Joshua Chamberlain, Sickles and Longstreet, many others were there at the hotel for this. There was a big ball, but here you can see Meade sampling the water, and hopefully it wasn't as laxative as they thought, because I don't know if we have any accounts of what happened after Meade finished his glass of water. But there's a lot going on at the Springs Hotel and on this property in 1869, and then into the 1870s, 80s, and 90s when the veterans reunions continued and were becoming more and more popular. Here's an image from inside the lobby of the Springs Hotel from, I think, Frank Leslie's Illustrated. It shows guests checking in, and like Tim, I believe, has already mentioned, if not, we're going to mention this, that the sale of relics was a major industry here in Gettysburg following the battle. And you can see it was mostly kids and teenagers who would dig up these relics or just gather them and then try to sell them to the tourists, as you can see is happening in this illustration. And there were many sad accidents where kids were actually hurt by unexploded ordnance. Maybe we'll do another program specifically on that in the future. Another image of the hotel, the large veranda porch is where all the generals would sit in their rocking chairs, and literally hordes of early tourists would come up to them and ask them questions. Can you imagine, I always like to think about this, Daniel Sickles or James Longstreet just sitting out on a rocking chair, and you can walk up to him and after touring the battlefield and ask what it was like, and ask the questions that I'm sure Tim still gets asked today. Why didn't you do this? And why did Lee order Pickett's charge? So there are lots of great newspaper articles about people visiting and actually asking these questions to the people who were involved. The hotel, like I said, it burned down in 1917. Here's a couple more images of it. And the site today, it's completely clear. If you ever golfed out on the country club, it's the 8th green where the hotel was located. If you've walked out there, it's not too far from the pond that's still there. It's just a little bit west of the pond where the hotel stood. This is the last known photograph of the hotel, taken probably in the 1890s or around the turn of the century. You can see some of the windows are busted out, and really by 1900 the hotel was not being used much at all in terms of gatherings and regular operations. It was more of just a kind of a hostel for different groups when they would come to Gettysburg. And in 1913 I think there were some soldiers there as well. So the hotel burned down. It was a natural accident. There was a chimney fire. The flues weren't open or something like that. And a big wooden structure, obviously, it burned down very quickly and nothing was left of it. Finally, you may be familiar with the lake that existed. It was actually dammed. Willoughby's Run was dammed near where the bridge is today at Old Mill Road. And there was a massive lake for boating and for relaxation. And the guests at the hotel could go out and enjoy this while they were staying. And you can see this is looking from Old Mill Road, looking toward Reynolds Woods across Willoughby's Run. So you can see in the very far distance of this image, the Reynolds Avenue border on what is Reynolds Woods or Herbst Woods, where Reynolds was killed on the morning of July 1st. So this is kind of the biggest development of the first day's battlefield, I would say. And Tim in a few minutes is going to talk about some of the other developments of the battlefield that were early, including things around Devil's Den and Little Round Top. But in terms of what happened on the first day's part of the battlefield, this was the big development. And there was a lot of attention that was drawn to this particular tract, and it probably brought a lot more attention to the first day's battlefield, having this commercial enterprise located just on the border of the battlefield. So the Springs Hotel is a great story. We have a lot of great documents and photographs of it at the Historical Society. If you're enjoying the video, I hope you'll hit the donate button and help us continue to preserve history and do programs like this every week. So Tim, why don't you continue with the storyline that we were working with before we got into this.
Okay, So one of the things I wanted to mention about the Springs Hotel is that a lot of the enterprises we're discussing are local enterprises. But the Spring Hotel is a great example of something that has virtually no locals involved. This is an enterprise that was conceived by a consortium of investors, and that consortium of investors changed as the years went by. People bought stock in the company, and people sold their stock in the company, and it kept changing hands between various investors. And these people were not really interested in battlefield preservation or tourism in Gettysburg or locals making money. This was a major money-making investment, and the Springs Hotel Company started to buy up land around the Gettysburg area, specifically around the time when the Gettysburg National Park and Gettysburg National Military Park Commission was established, because there was money from Congress to buy land around the area that the GBMA had turned over to the Battlefield Commission, and they were going to preserve some of these areas where the battle was fought. And the Springs Hotel Company specifically bought land from local people with the intent of selling it at an exorbitant price to the federal government and then making money from that speculation of property. And they actually held up construction of West Confederate Avenue for a time because they bought a key tract of land across where they knew the federal government was going to build an avenue. And this company is one of the reasons why the federal government had to start condemnation proceedings against people for land early on, because these people wanted so much money for the land and it was not the fair market value, because they were trying to make money. And it caused a lot of problems. And so this was an example of, this wasn't local people doing this. This was people who'd come in and bought the land cheap from local people, and then we're trying to sell it for a lot of money to the Park Commission. So I always find that aspect of the Springs Hotel Company very interesting. Now, with the increase of tourism, and we'll talk about that in a moment, as the years went by, there became a greater need for Gettysburg to improve its tourist infrastructure. And for instance, the Wagon Hotel, here's an 1867 image of it, looking south along the Baltimore Pike towards the town. This is, at the current intersection of the Baltimore Pike and the Emmitsburg Road or Steinway Avenue. This was primarily a hotel for wagon drovers, or people who were transporting goods in wagons to spend the night. And they quickly rebranded themselves after the battle and became known as the Battlefield Hotel. And of course, this hotel played a prominent role in the sharpshooter action on July 2nd and 3rd. And they highlighted the fact that there were bullet holes in the buildings, and there were holes in the wall where artillery shells came through. And you could stay there in a historic place where you actually could see battle damage. And I have another photograph of it, Andrew. Let's go to the next, 1869, I believe. This is from the Library of Congress. And the sign is hard to see, but the sign actually says the Battlefield Hotel. And this building was a prominent hotel in Gettysburg for many years. And so hotels expanded, hotels, needed to have more rooms. We needed places for a lot of people to stay. Let's go to the next one. We mentioned the Eagle Hotel earlier, and I showed a drawing of it from 1858. And here is the 1913 reunion image of the Eagle Hotel on Chambersburg Street. And you can see that this one greatly expanded. I have a good article from the 1913 reunion about a guy, I think he's in the 6th New York Cavalry. He's on Buford's staff. And he was here during the battle, and he stayed in the Eagle Hotel. And he says in the 1913 article that he's staying in the exact same room that he stayed in 50 years earlier. I always think that's kind of neat. If you can look at this hotel and figure out where the same room is, because it is greatly expanded. Now, a lot of people ask about the Eagle Hotel, which again, during the battle was John Buford's headquarters. And where is it now? Well, it burned down in a fire in 1960. I think we just threw this one in here. We've posted this on our site a few times, things about the fire. So in 1960, it burned in a fire. And today, it's the 7-Eleven. So at the corner of Chambersburg Street and Washington Street. Now, here is a photograph I just threw in here, just randomly, of the dedication ceremony of the Pennsylvania Monument, which is September 27th, 1910. But I wanted to give you an idea of the crowd of spectators that was here at the dedication of the monument. So think about this. In 1878, we had a couple monuments erected on the battlefield by veterans who were staying in an encampment on East Cemetery Hill. And in the 1880s, monument after monument after monument was erected. Pennsylvania Day was September 11th, 1889. New York Day is July 1st through 3rd, 1893. And monuments were erected all over the battlefield in the 1880s and 90s. And every time a monument was erected, every time there is a dedication ceremony, all the veterans that are alive that served in that unit come back to Gettysburg to help dedicate the monument, but they bring their families, and then they're all from the same towns. And so all the people from those towns come to the ceremony, and all the relatives of the people that were killed that served in those units during the Civil War come. So every time there's a monument dedication on the battlefield, there may be hundreds, if not 1,000 visitors that come into the town for a few days during that ceremony. And the town had, occasion after occasion after occasion where all these people needed to be fed and all these people needed to be housed in a hotel in town or somewhere, some accommodations had to be made. Now, there were some days that just were way out of control and out of hand. But, it's hard to imagine each monument dedication and how much business that brought into our town during this early period. Let's go to the next one. Now, there's a lot of commercial enterprises around town that are, going to take advantage of this. And, it's interesting to me over the years when I read someone who's critical of someone who profits from the tourism, or someone who is held up as providing a valuable service. And providing a valuable service to the tourists that come into the town or ripping them off seems to be a matter of opinion as to who is, formulating an idea of what value is. And, even today, I could tell you what I think is a valuable service and what I don't think is a valuable service, but it's just my personal opinion. And other people have different opinions about what's what. So it is fascinating. It is fascinating to read in early days what people think is a valuable service. Joseph Scherfy seems to attract a lot of criticism. So the man, his property is destroyed by the battle. There's fighting all around his house. His house to this day is covered with bullet holes, and he suffers a great amount of personal damage from the fighting that he will not be compensated for. But he has a peach orchard, and he has no problem putting a peach stand in the middle in his front yard. As a matter of fact, he likes to set up the peach stand and have his daughters run it next to a tree next to his house that has a cherry tree that has an artillery shell or a cannonball on it. And, he would go out and attract visitors and say, hey, you want to see the cannonball on my cherry tree next to my house? It's right by my peach stand. And he would sell peaches. And he always seemed to have an extra jar of peaches down below, the last jar of peaches from the actual 1863 peach orchard he was willing to sell you. And, John Batchelder, one of the great historians of the battle, and his Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It in the 1870s, actually was a little critical of Joseph Scherfy's enterprising sale of his peaches. But, tourists loved it.
Right, and we do have this cannonball too in that you see in the tree in the collections of the Historical Society. It's one of our favorite artifacts that was donated to us years after the fact, after the tree was cut down.
Now, George Arnold, who we mentioned in the beginning of the program, in 1878, so 15 years after the battle, he came up with this idea called the Battlefield Prospect Tower. And he caused to be built, him and some investors. We have some nice letters and documents in our collection, and actually have some of the certificates that he sold shares in his tower. And he gathered money together and he built an observation tower. And you can see from the sign in front of the tower, he charged money, and you could climb up in the tower. It was on East Cemetery Hill, and you could look out over the battlefield. He actually had a tour guide up at the top of the tower, and you could pay a little more money, and the tour guide would give you a little lecture about the battle from the top of the tower. Now, this tower was right on GBMA property, Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. Of course, George Arnold was a director of the GBMA. So, here's kind of an interesting situation where he is running a commercial enterprise on property that has been preserved by the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Memorial Association, I should say, the GBMA. And I know we have that even today, commercial, for-profit, nonprofit entities being partners. But this tower was there on East Cemetery Hill from 1878 until 1895, when it was removed, and so they could start construction on the monument to General Winfield Scott Hancock, which was dedicated in 1896. But another important factor in Gettysburg tourism is the railroad. The Gettysburg Hanover Junction Railroad was not the best designed railroad. There's a lot of complaints in it about it from early tourists. So you go to Baltimore, you come north to Hanover Junction, you come across to Gettysburg, you come south from Harrisburg, and then over to Gettysburg. In 1884, the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad was established, a direct railroad from Gettysburg to Harrisburg. And here is the golden spike laying, or the hammering of the golden spike. And this photograph is actually taken just north of the Mummersburg Road. In the right background of the photograph is the Cobean Farm, Samuel Cobean Farm on the first day's battlefield. It's toward the base of Oak Hill. And this railroad opened in 1884, and it really caused an immediate impact on a positive impact on tourism to Gettysburg, a nice modern railroad that was well designed. I should also mention, for the people who live in northern Adams County, the opening of this railroad, which primarily was done to bring tourists to Gettysburg in the battlefield, actually ended up having stops that were named Gardeners and Aspers, or Bendersville Station early on. And these railroad stops would actually have warehouses that would allow the people in Upper Adams County to supply the nation with their fruit, with their apples primarily. And this railroad just absolutely just increased our ability to sell apples on a national market. So it had a really huge impact in the apple industry. But this railroad brought tourists to Gettysburg. One interesting thing about it was the railroad company was not just happy to bring tourists and drop them off. They needed a destination in Gettysburg. So they actually, in late 1884 or the mid 1884, they created a spur line that went across the town of Gettysburg, over the fields of Pickett's Charge to the backside of Little Round Top, where they established an amusement park. So not only did the railroad bring you to Gettysburg, it would also take you directly to the amusement park owned by the railroad company. And then at the amusement park, they rented spaces out to vendors. They had a picnic area, they had restaurants, they had a fishing pond and knife throwing contests. So it's more like a carnival atmosphere. And they had a photographic studio. Let's go to the next one. William Tipton, starting in 1884, had a tintype gallery at Round Top Park. And we're fortunate because we have a number of images from his tintype gallery Round Top Park. And you can see these two images of, they're both from the same collection. There are people standing in front of a rock with a tent in the background. And of course, you know, I have found that rock, of course. And we know where the amusement park was, on the backside of Little Round Top. Here are two more photographs of the same rock from slightly different angles, but you can see the visitors in front of that huge rock. And you can go out today and find this rock. On the right is Henry Stort, Sally Myers Stort's son, whose father was a Civil War veteran, had passed away, about the time of his birth. And he is a assistant at the photographic studio for William Tipton on the backside of Little Round Top at the time of this view. Okay. Now we also have the trolley, and this started actively in 1893. It was operational from 1893 to 1916. The Gettysburg Electric Railway ran out of the town, and it ran down the Emmitsburg Road. It ran over through the peach orchard, past the wheat field, and it looped around to Devil's Den, out in front of Little Round Top. For 1 year, it actually went down Cemetery Ridge on the existing Gettysburg Harrisburg Railroad, and then past the fields of Pickett's Charge and back into town. But for most of its time period, they didn't really have, it didn't have that contract for very long. It had to turn around all around top and go back. They had 6 trolley cars running on the track, and on busy days they had 2 winter cars. They put the winter cars on. So at some point there were 8 trolleys, cars running around on this track, which seems very dangerous. There are several well-documented accidents with the trolley in the local newspaper, and it's fascinating. This is a private enterprise that runs on private property just off of the battlefield boundary. In some cases, the trolley blasted an area 30 feet wide right in the middle of the battlefield next to monuments that had just been dedicated, and it caused an early battlefield fervor amongst people who believed that this was a commercial entity that was out of control. Eventually, the case over whether the trolley should be allowed to exist on the battlefield went to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1896, an important decision was made that the federal government does have the ability to sue or condemn land because it's historically significant. And of course, in Gettysburg, that, there were a few cases where that came into play. But the trolley continued, even though that was 1896, the trolley continued to run until 1916, when the federal government actually acted on it and paid the trolley company at that time and took over the trolley and ripped the tracks up. We have lots of photographs of it at the Adams County Historical Society. Here's one at Devil's Den. I did a program on the Gettysburg Electric Railway in the 1990s at the old dorm at the Historical Society when we had our meeting room in the basement. And I'll never forget, I asked the question, because a lot of the people in the crowd were older, if anybody remembered the trolley that was in the audience. And 2 people in my lecture stood up and said they had ridden on the trolley. Again, the tracks were torn up in 1916. So I was a little stunned there. But we have a couple more photographs of it. I know people love to see photographs of the trolley in different years. This is one of the more recent. This is a later version of the trolley that ran around. The original trolleys were named after the generals on the battlefield, and you can see their names on some of the trolleys. Like I think Howard, we just saw on one of the last views. Let's go to the next one. And this is, I think, one of the cars that they enclosed, so that in the winter, they had a little fireplace in the back of one of the trolley cars, and you could go around the winter. Now, occasionally they put a guide on the trolley. So there was a guide that told you about the battle as you rode around the trolley.
One question, are any of the trolley cars still around in any format?
Not that I know of, but there is a trolley museum in Western Pennsylvania. I think it's in Greene County. I forget exactly where it is. And I wonder if they have, some of my friends have been there, will probably know, if they have the type of trolley car that we had. I don't think any of our trolley cars exist anymore, but maybe in that museum there's something very similar.
And we got a rare wow from Gary Edelman. So apparently there must be something in here that Gary is really excited by.
He might like some of our new photographs of the trolley that were shown. I thought we'd throw a few photographs in that not generally seen, because since our Devil's Den book came out, we had some stuff on the trolley, and we do have more photographs of it now.
Right, and I do want to give a shout out too to our good friends who shared this video tonight as well, and our we may have some of their viewers watching as well from the American Battlefield Trust. Tim and I both love the American Battlefield Trust, and hope you'll go over and like their Facebook page as well if you enjoyed the video tonight. Let's see. So this is another one, Tim, I believe, from the Historical Society collection. We do have one question about accidents with the trolley. I think there was one big one that you like to talk about.
There are three of them that come to mind, and one of them I think occurred in 1913, and it's where two trolleys were going around a bend in the woods, and they had apparently set up a system of lights. So one trolley would flip a light, and then down the line, because it was an electric line, a light would come on, and the trolley driver was supposed to see the light and then pull off on a siding if that light was on. But one of the trolley guys missed the light, and two trolleys came around the corner and smashed head on. And veterans were thrown from the trolley, and one veteran bounced off of a rock. I think that one, we had that accident in 13, there was one in 1910 on the same curve. And I think it was 1907 or 1909, a tour guide was on the side of the running board of a car, and they were coming down from Little Round Top on Warren Avenue. The tour guides would often stand on the running boards with a megaphone, talking to people. And he was on the driver's side, and he was pointing back towards Little Round Top and talking about the attack up the hill. And everybody in the car, including the driver, was looking back up the hill. And the trolley came out from some weeds across Warren Avenue in front of the car, and the car ran right into the side of the trolley. And the tour guide was very much injured when he flew off of the car and bounced off of a few rocks.
Wow, but it's amazing. Amazing, no one was killed in these accidents, or was there one? There
was a guy killed. There was a tour guide killed. Off the top of my head, this guy's name was Walter, and he was near the site of the old Home Sweet Home Motel. I forget what it was called there, but a little tourist house not far from where General Pickett's all-you-can-eat battlefield buffet is located. And he had his horse and a carriage sitting out front, ran into the house for a moment, came back, and the trolley was coming down the road, tried to get his horse out of the trolley's way. The horse kind of bucked into him, and he flew in front of the trolley, and the trolley ran over him. So a tour guide was run over by the trolley.
One question from our good friend Bob Marshall, who's a ACHS member. Did the trolley company sell any souvenirs, and do we have any? I know we do have a railroad tie, a very large wooden tie from the railroad, but is there anything else, Tim, that you know of? You know the collection better than anybody.
We have a couple ties, and we have spikes from the trolley. And then also we do have a ticket that is a ticket from the trolley, and we have 2 annual passes to the trolley. I think one of them is William Tipton's son. So we do have like cards that say this, so-and-so has a free ride on the trolley, and we have some trolley tokens. So, and then of course we have maps of the trolley route and, photographs and newspaper articles and stuff like that. Now, of course, the trolley was able to conduct its business because it had the help of local people. The trolley company was owned by a guy in Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, and a guy who wasn't really popular with the veterans as time went by because he refused to stop operations when he was told to do so. He waited until someone took him to court. But William Tipton was very prominent in the early establishment of the Gettysburg Electric Railway. In 1891, William Tipton was the president of the town council, and he was able to bring his buddy Hoffer into a meeting, and the town approved the construction of the trolley tracks in the town of Gettysburg on Gettysburg streets, and the town received no compensation in return for the use of their streets. And the paper was like, well, why would we do this for free? Why would we let this guy do this? We don't understand. He did put an electric plant in Gettysburg and then supplied power. Of course, he charged local people for electric power to their houses at the same time. But as it turned out, the trolley company at the same time was dealing with William Tipton, who had some land near Devil's Den, and William Tipton opened up an amusement park at Devil's Den. He had formerly purchased the Mumpers studio that was at Devil's Den. This is the Mumper Photographic Studio. Opened up a tin type gallery there. And then when the trolley came through, lo and behold, they came through his land, and he had the trolley stop there and let people off. And his wife ran a restaurant. He had a dancing pavilion, and he also helped negotiate the right of way through Samuel Wiley Crawford's land in front of Little Round Top. And so when the trolley opened up, it started using what the GBMA thought was protected land. And then, of course, Crawford had died previous to the trolley opening up, but not before Tipton got his signature on a right-of-way through his property. The whole thing is very interesting to read about, and Tipton is quite the wheeler and dealer. So Tipton Park at Devil's Den, an amusement park, existed there from depends on when he established it, 1888, 1893, the trolley came, he opened up this big amusement park. It lasted until about 1902, when the federal government condemned his land as well. But Tipton also got Wiley Crawford to give him an agreement that he had exclusive rights to take photographs on his land in front of Devil's Den. In 1884, William Tipton became one of the photographers that had the concept of sending photographers to Devil's Den and have them wait there. And he started to take photographs of parties in front of Devil's Den. You could get your photograph taken. I guess you paid for it. You gave him your address. You signed out a form. And when the negative and the prints were ready, he would send them to you. And here's a photograph he took in 1884 of the Carlisle Indian School. It's Native Americans in front of the rocks of Devil's Den in 1884. And some of them are identified in an article in the newspaper that talks about them visiting the battlefield at that time. William D. Holtzworth is the tour guide, who's also kind of in the middle of the photograph on a rock between the two guys in the front. And William Tipton wasn't the only one who had this enterprise. After the park secured Samuel Wiley Crawford's ground, there was fighting amongst the early photographers. So they set up a rotating schedule of photographers in front of the rocks of Devil's Den during the summer months. And I would say between 1884 and about 1930, there were like 8 different photographic firms that were recording images of tourists in front of Devil's Den. And just looking at the negative numbers and the companies that did it, I estimate there are between 30,000 and 50,000 photographs recorded of visitors in front of the rocks of Devil's Den. And I don't think that's an overestimate. It's just kind of a general broad guess. But these things you can buy on eBay. You could buy them in flea markets all around the town, and they're very collectible. And some of them are small cabinet cards, and some of them are huge albumen prints. And it's just a very fascinating subject, battlefield photography. Now, we talked about some of the early tourism of the battlefield. And and commercialization. And commercialization would continue as the years went by. To me, looking back on tourism in my lifetime, I think when I was a kid, it was at its height, the 100th anniversary of the battle. In 1963, it just seems like the motels and hotels in the late 50s and early 60s just increased at a vast rate. At one time, there were hotels and motels all the way down the Emmitsburg Road. And over the years, those hotels have been slowly removed. You know, we're 50 years now removed, well, you know, the 150th anniversary from the 100th anniversary of the battle. And a lot of these hotels have fallen into severe disrepair, and slowly they've been removed from the historic landscape. But today, actually, when you go around the battlefield, there's a lot less commercialization than there was 50 years ago. And you know, it's fascinating to know that this commercialization existed, you know, through the early period of battlefield visitation, and in some respect continues today.
That's great. Yeah, I think it is really important when you visit the battlefield to remember that if you look at an open field, there may have been a hotel or a motel or a gas station, or maybe even a famous spring located where you would just see the battlefield today. A really interesting kind of dimension to a study of Gettysburg and the whole county, really. We hope to do more programs like this, and especially bring new perspectives that are, maybe we'll do a program related to the Apple industry here in the next couple months. And we have a lot of other things planned about World War I, World War II, the Eisenhowers, and some earlier topics like the French and Indian War. So we're going to be doing programs like this every week for as long as we can. If you enjoyed it tonight, I hope you'll hit the donate button and support us. Even very small gifts go a long way to help us preserve all this incredible history. We are the keeper of millions of records and photographs and historic artifacts, and it's not cheap to keep these things safely preserved. And we have some real big plans for the future as well. So I hope you'll like us on Facebook. You'll check us out at www.achs-pa.org. Or just type into Google Adams County Historical Society. Make sure you get the Gettysburg one. But thanks for being with us tonight. And we're going to be back on Thursday night at 7 p.m. next week with another program topic to be decided. And thanks again. I hope that we're brightening your day with these programs when there's not a lot else to do. And thanks for supporting Adams County history. Have a good night, everybody.